Okay, I think it's recording now, so.
Hello.
Hi, Danielle. Share my screen. Oh my god, oh, I keep clicking the wrong button, okay. Alright, so last week we did like a drill where we kind of thought of rebuttals off the top of our head, but this week we're going to talk about more in depth about block files and these pre-written rebuttals. So once again, how do we write blocks? So the first step is to find the arguments that you need to write blocks against, or that you need to write arguments against, right? So you want to make sure that you're thinking of both the common AF arguments and the common neg arguments. And then next, you're probably just going to search up some keywords. Let's say on this topic, we know that, on this topic, we know that innovation is going to be a big argument. So, you might search up something like, how will price controls? So if you're trying to make rebuttals, right, you're trying to refute the fact that innovation will go down. So you can search up things like why price controls won't decrease profit, or how price controls would keep innovation, things like that, right? And then you're going to try to make as many unique responses under these arguments as you can. So let's say under innovation, right? You don't want to just have one or two like rebuttals to their case, because then well, of course, first of all, you have 4 minutes and you really do want to fill up all of the 4 minutes of your rebuttal time, but also the less responses you have, the easier it is for them to respond to your arguments, right? Like, let's say you spend 4 minutes just making like 3 different responses against their case. They could probably like refute all of those in 1 minute and then like spend a lot of time like destroying your case. So that's why we want to always be very well prepared and have more than just one response to each argument. Now, of course, it may be hard to find a lot of unique responses to very, what do we call them, like niche arguments, like the very weird arguments. In those cases, you just like probably you only need one or two, because most people aren't going to be running that anyways. So after you make the responses, we want to make sure that you're going to label them as like a non-unique, delink, link turn, impact mitigation, impact turn, disadvantage, or terminal defense. So once again, I'm sure some of y'all have forgotten. So like non-unique is basically saying, oh, the problem doesn't exist or it's going to happen in both worlds, right? Like if they're saying innovation is going down, you can be like, okay, innovation is going down, but even if innovation stays high, like according to the UW Library of Medicine in 2020, they found that like it's going to take 100 years for us to find the next life-saving drug, just because there's this diminishing return on like research and development, right? So that's the non-unique. So like even if there's less innovation, like it would have taken us another 100 years anyways. So like, is there really a problem, right?
Or
And then
another way would be like just innovation goes down regardless. It's just like
yeah, like, oh, the economy is doing so bad, like nobody wants to buy drugs anymore, or they have no money, I don't know. So innovation is going down anyways. Okay, next is a D-link, which is, once again, a link is the connections between arguments, right? So for innovation, the general link is like, oh, when there's price controls, profits go down. And when profits go down, so does innovation, which saves lives. So a D-link would be somehow taking out the profits link, right? You'd be like, oh, profits actually don't go down because there's more people to buy the drugs, which means that overall, like, there's no like net impact of going down. A link turn is where you take the link and you actually make it a good thing, right? Let's say they say profits mean less innovation, which is obviously bad because that means less people are going to live due to like some cancer saving drug or something, right? But a link turn would basically take that and say, actually, profits going down means that companies increase investment into innovation because they're doubling down on what actually makes them money, right? The impact mitigation is just saying, oh, the impact isn't as bad as you say. Let's say they say, oh, each new drug saves 1,000 lives. You could be like, no, actually, each new drug only saves like 10 lives because it's just like a copycat of old drugs, right? And it doesn't add up a lot. So that's impact mitigation, so like lessening the number. And impact turn, I would say it's kind of hard to make it in this argument because generally the impacts are about lives, right? Like I hope no one's gonna argue like, yeah, no, we should just let people die. Like that's a good thing for like XYZ like I'm sure none of y'all gonna do that, but they might run like some argument like if we were to raise prices of drugs in America, then companies need to like recoup those profits elsewhere. So they like raise prices in Africa. You could potentially, in like countries like Africa, it's just like Nigeria or something, you could potentially go in and you could say, like, oh, well, it's good if companies raise their prices in Nigeria because that means there's more domestic competition. And this domestic competition won't be crushed by like some international pharma giant like Pfizer or something, right? So that could be somewhere where you can impact turn. So the impact actually turns into a good thing. All right, Daniel, do you want to explain disadvantage?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think in public forum, disadvantages are usually read as responses, but they can also be read as their own position. But I think in terms of the response, it's something that the AF leads to that, or whichever side leads to that would be bad, that's independent of the impact or link. So, for example, it would be like, while it may decrease innovation, there's something entirely separate, like it causes like a war over something, right? It obviously has no link whatsoever towards the kind of argument, but it's an additional thing that probably and usually will like outweigh the argument or be worse than the argument that happens because of what they're doing. So like, if price controls lead to like war in like Iraq or something, that would be an example of a disadvantage, right? But it's not really related to the specific thing. Or sorry, not price control specifically, but like lowering innovation leads to like war in Iraq would probably be like, a disadvantage, but it's not really related to the kind of impacts that they talk about.
Yeah. Sometimes though, like it's hard for lay judges to. actually, I might go back on that. Okay, so I would say that there should be some kind of connection you make to their case, whether it's either like weighing the impact, like, oh, look, my dis ad is more important than theirs. But generally, when we read dis ads in public forum, it's also a little bit tied to like the link, right? So once again, if we go back to like the developing countries idea, if prices go up in America, that means sorry, if prices go down in America, that means prices will go up in developing countries. Um, like Ghana or like Nigeria or somewhere in Africa, right? And then they say like, oh, X amount of people die. So your disadvantage would take the same link or like the same idea, right? Sure, we agree that prices of like American like pharma companies will go up in countries in Africa, but that means there's more domestic drug companies that are springing up and creating all this innovation, which is good for everyone in the end, which saves more lives than theirs, right? So it can also be kind of linked to the same link chain. And then lastly is terminal defense. So we've never talked about this before, but it's basically like anything that is really hard to like argue against. I think actually maybe Daniel has a better explanation.
For terminal defense,
Yeah.
I think terminal defense is a very like it's not something that really exists, but so something would be there's a difference between mitigatory and terminal defense. So we already talked about impact mitigation, I think. So impact mitigation would be mitigatory defense, saying that something happens less than the case would say it does. But terminal defense is saying that it doesn't happen at all, or like I think an example would be like there was a military aid topic that was like, Russia fill in for Chinese military aid in a country. So an example of impact mitigation would be like Russia doesn't want to fill in; their economy is too low to fill in right now, right? So that would lead to less fill in and less impact from it. But the terminal defense would be, Russian missiles don't work in Chinese helicopters. Russian military aid can't actually be given.
Yeah.
So
So
like,
it's kind of like there's obviously ways that you can respond to what people might call terminal defense. But generally, like, climate change is a really good example. So if we look at this, right, let's say they're like, oh, climate change will kill millions of people, but if the US like got a bunch of renewable energy, we would save the entire world, right? So some kind of terminal defense would be something like this. According to Loris 19, even if the US cut 100% of carbon emissions, it would not make a difference in stopping global warming. In fact, the Science and Policy Institute finds that global growth will replace the US elimination of all carbon in just 7 years, right? So the reason why this is like really strong is because like renewables probably aren't going to cut like 100% of carbon emissions in the near future, but this is like taking them at the best ground, right? Like even if you assume that the US just instantly has no more carbon emissions, it still won't help in stopping global warming.
I think, wait, Nicole, I think that's more of a non-unique, isn't it? Right? It just says global warming is going to happen anyway.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I feel like terminal defense is just anything that can take out their case.
Well, I think terminal defense more than like a non-unique. It says that the impact like can't happen rather than like it happens anyway. So
Mhm.
like I think if it was like renewables solve climate change or U.S. renewables solve climate change, an example of like terminal defense on that would be like the U.S. grid can't adopt renewable energy. Period. Like it just doesn't function with the U.S. grid or
That
U.S.
makes
energy grid.
sense.
Yeah. So
But
it's
I don't
like
know. In public
that.
forum though, I call everything that is like super hard, like top quality like this, we call it terminal defense.
Oh yeah, no,
Okay.
it's like honestly, the words are like they lose their meaning, right? It's like the difference between like scope and like magnitude and stuff. There isn't like an actual like meaning behind the words. You just say them and then you have to explain them.
Yes, exactly. All right. So now that we've talked about wait, does anyone have like any questions on like the different types of responses that you can have? Okay, I'm assuming that's a no. Just know that y'all will have to write this later. So if you don't have questions, you probably should be asking. If you do have questions, I meant. Anyways, that's besides the point. Okay, so now we've talked about you know, how to write one. So let's look at the first step, which is finding the key arguments, right? So the key arguments on AF are once again affordability is the biggest one, right? Like people can't afford drugs, which means that if we had price controls, more people would be able to afford drugs. The second biggest one is like excessive profits, which is just like, oh, companies are making so much money that they don't actually need, right? And while that's not inherently like a bad thing, like every company needs some kind of profit. Like if it comes at the expense of like, millions of lives, or they're using this profit to do something bad, that's a separate argument. So generally you'll see like a lot of arguments that are tied to like, oh, they're just making so much money, which is why they can lobby in Congress or like bribe politicians or things like that, right? So a really good way to take out arguments is just to like find a common link in all of them, which in this case would be excessive profits, and just write a lot of stuff against profits, right? Just be like, oh, 90% of like pharma companies don't earn profits. Like the examples to give you are like 10%, right? But when we implement these price controls, it affects 100% of these companies, which means that you're like punishing the 90% of good companies along with the rest. So something like that that can like take out the link of a lot of different arguments is always good. Okay, so stemming from profits comes opioids and M&As. So profits also go to like things like lobbying, which influences the political system, although I doubt there's gonna be a lot of people who read that. It also creates the opioid crisis, which, okay, so the way that they say is that because they have all these profits, they spend a lot of money marketing their drugs to like doctors, right? They're like, hey, doctors, you should keep recommending your patient to take this drug like every single day. And like our drug is like specifically super good. And then doctors prescribe this, and then like a bunch of Americans get addicted to their painkillers, which creates the opioid crisis, which kills millions of people. And then another thing, oh, whoa, another thing from excessive profits is mergers and acquisitions, which is basically like, oh, because they have so many profits, they have so much money. They use this money to like buy up smaller pharmaceutical companies, which is bad because obviously like one less company on the market probably means that there's going to be less competition and less innovation now that they're like one. Um, the key thing to note though is that if they run any of these arguments like under excessive profits, right? Like let's say the opioid crisis or mergers and acquisitions, they're basically conceding the link into your argument, and probably all of you are going to run innovation, which is the link into innovation on neg is that when profits decrease, so does innovation, right? If they're saying they can solve this like opioid crisis and this mergers and acquisition crisis by through price controls, they're basically saying that they can decrease these excessive profits and thereby decrease the other stuff. And, of course, that could also mean that they would decrease innovation as well, right? So it kind of concedes the link into there. So I would advise y'all to take notes because y'all are going to have to write a block file for this. But yes, these are key arguments on AF. And then on neg, the biggest one obviously is innovation, right? They don't have money because of price controls, which means they can't research, and like inventing a new drug costs like billions of dollars. I would say the second biggest one is like tiered pricing, which is basically like companies sell drugs at different prices in different countries, right? In America, they might sell you like 50% higher than the rest of the world. And perhaps in Europe, it's like 30% higher than the rest of the world. And perhaps in like Asia, I don't know, like other countries, it's a lot cheaper, right? And generally, this like impacts the developing world where basically like, oh, because you raise prices in America, I mean, because you decrease prices in America and companies don't make a lot of money in America, they'll have to raise prices in, developing countries, which are in Africa or somewhere else. And then I want to say this is a big one. I think drug shortage does exist. They just talk about like, oh, when we have this pharmaceutical industry and we have price controls, because these companies are losing so much money, like a lot of drug manufacturers will be going out of business. And then if we don't have manufacturers, obviously there won't be any drugs and we'll have a shortage, right? And then the last one is probably something related to delays, which is like lives impact, which is basically like, oh, because negotiations on drugs take so long, like obviously you have to negotiate in order to set a certain price control and a price limit for these drugs, right? Like the government has to talk it out with the company. It's like, hey, you gotta like, sell it for $5, and the company might be like, no, we gotta do 10. They keep arguing, and it's like a year before the drug gets onto the market, and that could have like caused thousands of people to die in the process. So those are some basic arguments. Does anyone have questions on like AF or neg args?
Wait, for the F one, can you explain again? What do you mean by you essentially concede the argument about something?
Yeah. Okay, so basically on neg, I'm sure everyone is going to run innovation because it's just like the best argument on neg. But basically, innovation is like, hey, if profits go down, innovation goes down too. Okay, and then on AF, if they're running things like mergers and acquisitions and like the opioid crisis or lobbying, what that stems from really is these companies have a lot of money, which is why they can heavily market to doctors, causing the opioid crisis, or which is why they can use this huge amount of money to buy an entire other company, right? But through price controls, we can somehow magically decrease that. And that magic link is they're decreasing their profits, which means they don't have money to heavily market opioids, or they don't have money to, like buy other companies. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And if they're conceding that they are decreasing the amount of profits that these companies have, they're in some way basically agreeing to like conceding your case, right? Because you're saying once profits go down, innovation goes down. They're like, yeah, we're decreasing profit, right? So if they go on their case, your case, and they're like, hey, we actually don't decrease profits, you're like, okay, well, how are you going to solve for like mergers and acquisitions and the opioid crisis? Does that make sense?
Can you repeat that last part again?
Yeah, so if they like in rebuttal, they're trying to like refute your case, they'll be like, oh, profits don't go down actually because I don't know, like a greater market size, right? Then you can point out like, okay, if you don't decrease profits, how are you going to solve for the opioid crisis and like these giant company purchases made by the companies, right? Which all stems from like money.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. So like essentially if they have the same amount of money and you aren't decreasing their revenue, why would anything change? So, there we go. All right, does anyone else have any other questions?
Yeah, so last week I said that like I responded that like, you know, like um drug prices going down would actually make more people buy the drugs and blah blah blah. But
Mhm.
like if that were true, would that actually kind of be bad for AF because like because like it would kind of destroy like their
It
argument?
depends what you run. Most people just run affordability, like a one contention case, or maybe some other really weird argument on F. I don't know. I don't remember what else other people ran, but a way that you can respond to what like Neg says, right? Neg is obviously gonna be like, oh, once they decrease profits, they're gonna like cut out innovation. What you can say is no, when they decrease profits, they cut out of like marketing for opioids, or they cut out of like mergers and acquisitions, right? So they don't buy these things and they can still use that money on innovation. And I think really the idea of like excessive profits is that they don't need it, right? Like you can have a 10% profit margin and still do R&D, right? You don't need like a 50% profit margin, right? So if they are losing some money, that's okay because they still have a lot of money, right? I feel like the idea that every like 40% decrease in the price of a drug means a 40% decrease in R&D really stems from the idea that then the companies are not going to be able to make money, right? But if they're making so much, they probably don't need it at all. It's probably just like going to the shareholders or like going on useless stuff in marketing, right? So a way that you can warrant it is that like what makes a company money, right? Obviously it's a drug. Like uh, if a drug company doesn't sell drugs, what can it sell? If it has no drugs, what can it market, right? So I would say that even when like their profits do decrease, I would say like innovation is not the first thing they would cut. They would cut things like lobbying or like marketing, right? So you could pose that as an alternative. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So, anyone else have any questions? Okay. Let's move on. So here's an example block. This was on another topic. Y'all don't have to actually read it, but we're just gonna like look at it. Okay, so in the formatting, this is what the formatting looks like. It looks weird when I paste it into Google Slides, but like just look at this formatting. Okay, and the first thing that you want is like the headline, like A2 just stands for like against rural hospitals, right? So like for example, your opponents are reading rural hospitals, then I would like scroll through my Word document and then I find A2 rural hospitals.
The better way to head it is AT colon rural hospitals.
Yeah, or AT.
Or
It doesn't really matter. You could literally probably just put rural hospitals and no one would like fight you. Right? You can really format it the way you want, but what we do want is we want a headline, right? We want a description of what argument you're really trying to argue against. In this case, I'm trying to argue against rural hospitals.
yeah,
So
but
then you have like 4 responses here, right? And you want to make sure you label the kind of arguments, right? So we can see 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 arguments, and you want to label what kind it is. So right here, I've used shorthand T. I bolded it. T for turn, DL for D-link, and then like I just typed out mitigate, but you could probably do M, right? And you can make up your own shorthand. This is just what me and Hannah use. Like non-unique is an NU, right? But you can definitely use your own, like whatever makes sense to you. Maybe D-link is just like D would make sense to you, right? I don't know. But you do want to label your responses. So like let's say they read this argument. Maybe you don't have time to read all 4 of these because they have like 10 different contentions you have to respond to, right? So you can only choose one, and like it's a lot faster if you can label them. And it's also easier for the judges, if it's a tech judge, that if you like tell them what kind of argument it is. But so first you want to label it, then you want to make sure. So like obviously you want your card name, right? It's kind of like the way that you would write a mini contention, except each response is usually one card or two at most. So right here we see Herman 19 finds hospitals caring for poor uninsured patients see higher, more stable revenue under M4A because it pays higher base rates than Medicaid and infinitely more than nothing at all. So obviously, like to the average person, we're like, what? Like that makes no sense, right? So after your card or before your card, either after or before, somewhere in your response, you want to summarize what the evidence means in like English, right? So rural hospitals benefit under M4A because M4A allows many poor patients to access healthcare and pay higher than Medicaid. So that makes more sense, like than the card itself. Although, of course, for y'all, this is probably still super confusing because you don't know what like any of this means, probably. But you know, you want to make sure you like summarize the arguments in one sentence. And then after that, you generally want to do weighing underneath. Although if you don't have time or like, I don't know, you're just a lazy prepper, this is probably like the least important part. Like the most important part is just to make sure you have the responses. But if you have time afterwards, probability is always good. Weighing is also always good. And like we talked about weighing, it's just like why is my argument more important than my opponent's, right? And there's I would say 3 main types of weighing, right? The first is on probability, second on magnitude, and third is on time frame. So probability is like, oh, it's more likely that my argument is going to happen than yours, so you should like believe my argument. Or magnitude is like I have more like bigger numbers than you, right? Like 30 million people died, you only have 10 million, like obviously we should be looking to me. The third would be time frame, which is mine's happens before yours, but you definitely have to explain why that is important, right? Because like just because mine's happens a year before yours, like what does that actually mean? Sometimes it means that if mine's happens first, yours doesn't happen, right? Or it makes yours worse. So right here we have the probability prefer argument because historical precedent is on our side, right? So a lot of the way that we can prove probability is that like it's happened in the past, so it's probably going to happen now, as compared to like, you know, some mathematician crunching some numbers and telling you this might happen in the future. If we look to historical examples, it's probably a higher probability. And of course, you can't just say like, oh, prefer my argument because historical precedent is on my side. Like you need to prove that is on your side, which is why we have another piece of evidence. Archer 20 explicates that rural hospitals are stronger in states that have expanded Medicaid under the ACA as the uninsured rate in those states dropped from 35 to 16%. But anyway, so sometimes you don't have time to read the weighing, but it's always good to have it because it really like gives the judge a reason why they should prefer your argument over your opponent's, right? Because after we get through like the 8 speeches in the round, the judge is like, okay, who do I believe? They're saying they're right, they're saying they're right, but no one did the comparison. But once you do the weighing, that's where it's home run. Okay. And then make sure you keep the cards cut at the bottom. So like you don't want to just have like evidence and they're like, can I see the evidence? And you like don't have it, right? Do you want to say something, Daniel?
Yeah, I was just about to say that this is really where kind of like mitigatory defense comes in handy, is with weighing. So like mitigatory defense on its own isn't useful, but it's only really good when complemented by weighing. So that's another thing to note when you're like cutting defensive or when you're cutting like responses, is to do that, or is to keep that in mind.
Yes. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, I'll take that as a no. All right, so we talked through this. Okay, we still have some time, so I'm gonna do an example one. Okay, so let me. Oh, I forgot to talk about one thing. Okay, one last thing. Let me share my screen again. So obviously you're going to have like more than just one argument or a couple arguments, right? Like right here we have like 8 arguments listed out, and while that doesn't seem like a lot, in some topics, like there's like 20 arguments you have to prep against, right? So then at this point, what do we do? So if you look at like let's say we close this, right? So if you like, let's say I have like this 200-page block file and I'm trying to like look through it, it's probably pretty hard for me to like control find innovation, right? Or like I have to like scroll through the 36 results. I probably don't want to do that. And I probably don't want to be like scrolling through a bunch of the pages. So what we do want to do is go to the navigation panel. And then if you go to headings, that's where you can see all the headings, right? And this is like, you've probably seen the headings before and you probably like never used them, right? So there's, oh, that's not what the normal heading looks like.
Yeah, this is like verbatim. It's
Yeah, I was gonna talk. Okay. Let's talk about the normal one first. Okay, so right, we see these. So let's say A, B, C, D, F, G. Okay, so let's say those are a bunch of different arguments, right? If you put like heading 1, then it'll keep it as heading 1, and then let's say this one's heading 2, it'll like tag it underneath, right? And then heading 3. I think you can keep going. And then heading 4. Okay, so there's just 4, but you can also like collapse them if you want. And this just allows it a lot easier to, find your arguments. And so if we look here, right? Okay, if I like squish all of this, right? So the most basic ones you see is AF, and then under AF you get like AF's front lines, the advantages, the rebuttals, and then the neg, disads, weighing, and then front lines and rebuttals, right? So let's say you're on AF. Well, me and Hannah label it AF and neg, but most people label it the opposite way, so we're not going to talk about that. But let's say you're on AF and you need to do some rebuttals, right? And under here you can see that I have arguments. There's a lot of arguments, right? So I grouped them under general things, right? There were a lot of contentions about the economy, politics, like things that impact the world in general, healthcare, innovation, and healthcare shortage, right? So these are the main categories of arguments. And then under each one, I had like more specific arguments, right? So a lot of like what people will say on innovation is that like less profit means less innovation, or the US does all the innovation, or like where is it? There was also like the US government does most of the innovation. Oh, is it this one? No, the US government does most of the innovation, right? So like you would have specific like headers for each argument, and then underneath each one you would have all of your different arguments. So this one we had like, wow, 14, that's important, wow, that's cool. But anyway, so like under each one you have a lot of different responses to that specific argument, which is that like R&D goes down, right? And then if we go to like politics, you can also see a lot of other ones. And the thing that I'm using right now is called verbatim. I probably recommend that everyone uses it just because it's a lot easier to not only like create headers and format your block file, but it's also easier, like let's say you're in a round, right? And let's say they run like innovation and they run something from politics, right? So let's say you're in the middle of a round and you're trying to read like turn blah 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 blah, and then you have to suddenly scroll down and like go to like Biden public option, and then you have to like scroll here or something, and it's probably going to take you a lot of time, and you're going to like waste a lot of time, right? But with verbatim you can just create a new speech document. Hey yo, stop tripping. Okay, and then oh my god, this looks so ugly. But anyways, let's say there's a specific argument I want, like mergers decrease, right? I just have to press the tilde button, which is like right here. I will show y'all what the button looks like later. But if I press the tilde button, right, I get everything under mergers decrease, and then I can go like down here, and then I can click Biden public option, and it'll paste right there. So then I don't have to scroll through all of it. I have it all in one document. And it's also very useful for a lot of other reasons, but I'm gonna paste this in the chat, and I'd recommend y'all download it. Like, it was made by debaters for debaters. So, I mean, like, it's not a virus because my computer is still fine. So yeah, I'd recommend y'all download it. If you have any problems with like the download process, just let me know. But okay, now let me write an example block for y'all. Okay, so is there any argument that you guys want to see me write an argument against, or
Against innovation?
all right, let's do innovation. Right, so innovation will be like my header 1, and then there's a lot of specific arguments under innovation, right? So let's say they're gonna say like the government does all of the R&D, or like public universities. A lot of people say that, right? They're like, oh, the government does so much research and development. Okay, so a lot of people read like 75% of research is done by by public universities, right? So obviously we don't need private companies to do innovation. But if I'm AF and I'm trying to argue against innovation, what am I gonna do? I gotta find something that says public innovation is really bad, right? So I'm gonna say the government, public, no, I'm gonna say private companies are necessary for drug innovation. Wow, look at that. We already have a card. Okay, so this is the first one I'm gonna use. So like, despite what they say, like they might tell you that so this is like a right, because I'm like mitigating their impact, because only 90% of it comes from pharmaceutical, like private sector. But that's still a pretty large amount, right? So obviously the private sector is still vital. So I'm just gonna split my screen. And the first thing I do is generally I just Sullivan, right? Because that's the guy's last name. Sullivan 18 finds that private drugs, newly innovated drugs, 90% come directly from the private sector pharmaceutical industry, right? So there we have it. And then I'm gonna cut the card, and I'm gonna Thomas Sullivan. Right, so I have the citation, and then I'm just gonna cut the part that I used, which is like right here. And then best practice, you want one paragraph before and one paragraph after. Right, so go here. Oh, okay. And then I'm gonna make this smaller. It's like make it 8. And then the part that I said is 90% of drugs come from the pharmaceutical industry. Okay, and what I'm gonna do is, the pharmaceutical industry can kind of refer to like both private and public, right? We're not really sure. So I'm just gonna write private in here. And I'm not like misconstruing it, right? Because it is talking about the contrast between public and private pharmaceutical companies. So, you know, putting it there just makes it like more obvious to whoever's trying to read the card that it is talking about private. And then I'm gonna highlight the author's last name and then the year. And there, I have the cut card, right? And then the last thing you want to do is like summarize this card in like layman's terms. At this point, it's like pretty self-explanatory, right? Like this isn't super confusing. So what I would add is, though public universities for like, yeah, let's just say public research institutions do some research, private companies are key to drug development. Right, so there we go. That's my first one. And then I probably want to go out and find another one. Obviously, we're not going to click on that. Okay, let's see why the government is bad at innovation and drugs. Right here. Ah, yeah. Okay, wait. A? Where'd that part go? Oh, right here. It's the title. It's literally the title. Wonderful. Okay. So this is like a D-link, right? They're trying to say the government just does all of it and they can take care of it. But Stossel 16 finds that federal government can't private drug development. And if we read fewer drugs and worse patient outcomes, and will lead to less innovation. Worse innovation. Okay, and then I'm gonna cut the card. So I use the heading. Just copy that. And obviously there's no like paragraph before and after. And then here, that part. And then I'm just gonna highlight the parts. So author last name, the 16, this part, and then this sentence. And then I'm gonna replace it's a private industry. All right, and then there's my second card, and then I'm just gonna like sum it up, right? Something like that. And then there, I summarized it. Okay, so does anyone have like any questions about anything that I did here? Like, it seems pretty easy, right? Like, you just have to like search up the government sucks or like private companies so good, right? Anyone have any questions about how I did this? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So Oh,
Wait,
it's
go to the-
blocked. Oh yeah, you can't download it on like your school computers. This only works on your private computers if you don't have one.
Wait, you actually? I think you can get it on your school computers. I personally don't know how, but I know like Andrew Shaw can.
Right, there might be some way, but I don't know how.
Yeah, I don't know how is it either.
It's posted in this organization thing. If you go to the, I think it's in the Lincoln. Oh my God, the LD channel thing or whatever, and I think it's in the resources. I might be wrong though. I'm going to check.
The LD channel.
Yeah. I think it's the first. Yeah, it's the first message that was sent there.
Yeah, Tanusha Ellie probably posted it there.
In in resources. Huh? Ah, I found it. Okay, I will. Can I forward a message? Is that possible?
I don't know.
I mean, I guess you could just copy and paste the entire thing.
I could paste the link. Okay, wait. Let me know if this link works for y'all. Can you click on it and see if it works? Okay, to make this easier, I will actually just paste the whole thing right here. I'm put it in the resources channel too. I just like copied the whole message. So if y'all wanna know how to do this on a school computer, it's also the last post I just posted in the resources channel. So it should be right there. Yeah. I guess you cannot see that. But yes, please, I totally recommend downloading Verbatim. It makes life easier. And yeah, so that's all for today.
Wait, and also one more thing to note is you might think, wow, I shouldn't like use Word because I can't share it, but you can also like share Word documents and work on them simultaneously. So, using the like share function.
Yes, and
Another
if anyone has any questions about how to do that, feel free to ask Daniel Bomberger. Because I don't know. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about like download process for Verbatim or anything that we talked about today? Okay, so what I'm gonna say for y'all is, I want y'all to write blocks on against innovation on the neg. So you are AF and you're responding to neg. So you're gonna be like, innovation doesn't go down for 10 different reasons or whatever, right? I just want you guys to write at least 3 responses to innovation on the neg. It should be pretty easy. Like you just have to search it up. Like there's tons of people who are hating on price controls. And then on against AF, I would say it's kind of hard to like respond to accessibility because like the idea that price controls will decrease costs and make it affordable for people is pretty easy. So what I would say to prep out against on the AF is prep out like excessive profits, right? Like the idea that most companies make a lot of profits or they don't need this kind of money.
Wait, when you were writing the thing for